Hi, it's good to see you all. I'm glad that the chairs are full. There was a point earlier where I didn't realise they were keeping you outside, and I thought there was no one here. So it's good that that's not true. My name's Claire Murray. I'm a digital designer at Red Badger. It's February, apparently. I'm going to talk today about I want to share some kind of personal experiences, which is sort of an excuse for me whining so that no one feels offended. Okay. Anything we can do about echoing sound? Speak quietly. Should I move it down? It's because I'm saying everything twice. It's really important. How is this any better? Still the same? Am I standing near a speaker? Should I come over here? My words are really tiny. I can't really move very far away. All right. So hopefully that's not too distracting for you. So I'm going to talk about some personal experiences about my breakup with design and prototype files. I am still a designer. I still do make these files, but I just wanted to share some examples of my journey. My background's in traditional graphic design. I did graphic design at university, and I've worked for mostly small agencies and for, happy birthday, person over there. And my move into digital work kind of came naturally when the agency as I was working for just got more and more digital projects. And so I've worked in lots of waterfall situations as well as in the more agile way we work at Red Badger. So I've been with Red Badger for 9 months now, and quite recently in a large corporate environment, one client asked me this. They said, what are you doing all day? I don't understand where all your time is going because I can't see the output to justify your existence on the shared drive that we have. So that was essentially translates as, why haven't you made enough Photoshop and design files? Where's we work? So this struck me at the time as, at the time of the conversation, it struck me as such a fundamental misunderstanding of where the value of designers should be placed. But after a few days later, having looked back at some of the design work, or trying to work out what he was talking about, I realized that maybe that's a valuable question that somebody in my past life might have asked quite reasonably, because there probably wasn't a huge amount of stuff on the shared drive. And so I thought that might be a really good topic of conversation, is to just chart a bit of an evolution of how I got to be so incredulous that I'd done a really small amount of work, of physical work, apparently, according to him. And yeah, I thought that was appropriate. So I think that's a good topic. So today I'm going to talk about why these processes that we work in design should always contribute to working software. How an understanding of engineering, especially front-end engineering, is really fundamental, I think, to getting your design vision into code. And also why working across the whole product is really essential. So as I mentioned, we work in cross-functional teams at Red Badger. So we work with a whole set of disciplines on a project at the same time to make sure that we're talking to everybody. So that's clients, UX and design teams, software engineers, testers, project managers. And fundamentally, we work together to deliver value to real users as quickly as possible. So that's the same for UX and design. So our joint team purpose is to work on things that matter, the end things that matter. So did more people buy your stuff? Did you save more lives or sell more ice cream? And so your final deliverable is always working software that drives results. And so my point today is get invested in that working software and not in your work in progress design files. So fundamental one, respect your final outcome is built in code, which is, not that surprising really. But I've seen countless portfolios from designers with beautiful specced out visuals because, the engineers ruined it. And so many clients of, but this is what I gave you. Why isn't it the same? And it's because it's not the same. Traditional design tools were never, well, they're obviously getting a lot better, but they were never built to handle the complexity of software. Like typography adheres to a totally different set of rules. Prototyping tools can give you a great indication of flow, but they can't tell you how long your API is going to take to respond, or how the CSS animation you want to use will affect performance. And so to produce a good outcome, we need to make sure we understand the fundamentals of how you execute in the medium. And we need to get working features in this medium as soon as we can. So this isn't a new idea. I didn't come up with this idea myself. And I think there's obviously lots of faces and people that are practicing prototyping in code and doing things as quickly and as agile as possible. I think GDS is a great example, the government digital services. And they do loads of code prototyping, and they use lots of shared ways of working. And sorry, for some reason my notes are really small on this slide. And that allows their UX and design team to prototype in code and work with the real UI. And I think this is amazing, and I think it's a fantastic tool and a fantastic way of working. But it's also fundamentally set up for the organization that they are. It's very large. They have a lot of tools. They have a lot of code snippets. It's a huge infrastructure that allows them to leverage this power. And it's been built for a very specific purpose. I think that can be quite intimidating if your project or your situation doesn't warrant such a setup, and if you're just looking for somewhere to start as a designer. So fundamental 2 is make sure that the tools you're using work for you and that you're using the right tools. So learn about the fundamentals of front end and make sure that that understanding is reflected. So typography is one of my favorite ones, because this is the one that excuse me, too much cola, struck me most when I first started. So obviously typographic fundamentals from a learning point of view are based on letterpress, based on actual little pieces of lead that used to go in between movable type. So when you take that into Photoshop, which is the second example, or other design tools, that's kind of roughly, so the large grey area is your entire letter form height, and then the small grey is the leading. So that's like roughly reflected when you get into Photoshop. When you move that into CSS, your line height is entirely calculated differently. It appears in a different point in your typographic element. Typographic elements render differently across different browsers. Sometimes they look amazing, sometimes they look totally awful. Sometimes if you change the size, they look better in the same browser. Different like artistic effects, most of these tools were built for artworking or photo editing. I worked on a really beautiful website project once where we got to the end of all of the upfront design work and realized that one of the designers had relied entirely on multiply, which at the time was pretty unfeasible from a front end perspective. And so we'd sold the whole vision into the client based on something that was fundamentally pretty unfeasible. Such a shame it's all squished. One of my other recent favorite ones was going through a really, really long and laborious testing report that made huge comments about how important it was the tappable areas were of a certain size, and that the ones we were looking at weren't performing effectively. And then I got to the end of the report and realized that the report was based on an actual prototype and not on anything that anyone had built. So we need to stop perfecting visuals and experiences in mediums that are just poor imitations. I'm not saying throw them away, but I just want everyone to stop and think about how appropriate they really are, and how much, when you kind of dig into it, they are fundamentally mismatched in many ways. They should be treated with caution, and we should decide where their use is best placed. So consider carefully where drawing or prototyping tools can credibly and quickly add value to the working software, and where they just kind of get in your way a bit. So be really clear with the problem we're trying to solve. What's the quickest way to the answer? Like, will this work in a responsive layout? Are you going to spend 5 days drawing out your whole application in 8 different viewport sizes? Or are we going to kind of have a think about how we might be clever about getting that into code quickly and testing it? It's an infinitely, if you're working on something that's completely fluid, it's basically an infinitely variable product. Trying to visualize that in a static medium is difficult to get your head around sometimes, and also not very fast. Paper prototyping, I think if your fundamental question is, will users understand this question flow? Will they get comprehension of what we're asking them? Then that doesn't need to be in anything other than on a bit of paper that lays out your order. Do users notice our error messaging convention? Maybe that's something that we do need to get into a more hi-fi visual. And so you don't need everything for everything, and a complete set of files and prototypes will almost always include waste, whether that's wasted meetings, to having the discussion the first time, to re-having a discussion when you get to build it, working up 6 different viewports, or even just missed validation opportunities for spending so long in design that your actual product doesn't ship for another 2 months. And even if you've managed to consider all these fundamental things like API responses and how you're going to get all of that content to a user in an appropriate way, if you've worked up everything end-to-end in a prototype, then you've actually wasted the most time, because you should have just gotten all of that information into code the first time around. So I guess fundamental 4, the perils of over-investing, which I think hopefully people will be able to sympathize with. One of my favorite ones is mismanaged stakeholder expectations. So the problem with a complete UI is that it looks like so much more of a full solution than it really is. So I kind of really wanted like a Western, with like the bits, the houses fall down. And so, especially to less trained eyes, you get something that looks fantastic, because it always looks fantastic, because that's our job. And they think, great, well, we just got to build it now. And it's just such a fundamental misrepresentation of the work that's actually been undertaken. And then also, once you've done all of that work and they start building it, you guys start rubbing your hands together and go, great, okay, so we can start on the next version. And before you know it, you're on like MVP 7, and you're going to be so far away from the actual reality of the product by that point. And you're working on new features before even validating the original ones. It's also doing yourself a disservice, because you're working on such a disproportionate amount of the project, and it's such a small pie section that you don't, if you're working on the visual layer only, you don't give yourself an opportunity to think about the depth of the problem at hand. And also applying such a broad spectrum view to all of the product, rather than drilling deep into the real specificity of a specific feature. Okay, so complained loads. What now? I think get invested in all aspects of the product. Work collaboratively across the whole team, and solve project challenges together. UX design is not a single stage, and you should be able to bring design thinking to all parts of the product. So does this feature help us add value? Are we asking the right questions? Could we solve the problem in a different way? Why do 30% of our people drop off at this point? So you can get involved in planning and strategy. Can we see the sample API responses? How long is it really going to be? We've got a beautiful design with 4 words in it, and then someone comes back and goes, oh, no, legal need to put 80 different sentences in there. How many people fill the section out? You can make friends with engineers, they're people too, and get a complete picture of requirements, gather some data. What accessibility considerations are there? What does the tab order look like? Can we listen to the whole thing on a screen reader? What does that even sound like? How do we solve business problems in a way that's inclusive? And then you can take this shared understanding and proliferate it across the team and help everyone else do your job for you or with you. So spend time delivering and developing patterns that leverage the power of code. The beauty of that is everything, you can write a spacing rule once and it can be rolled out across everything, and you've only had to do one instance of it. And then you can bring the learning of what that rule and the fundamental reasons behind that rule to the engineers and get them to also championing that point, I guess. So if you explain to them what the intent behind the decision is, they can help you support that decision in the future. Swap documentation for conversation. I think even if you've done your due diligence and learned all of the limits of what you can do in front end, and then create a fantastically detailed markup that details all of these different features, if you put that in front of anybody who hasn't been involved in the process, it's very unlikely that that's going to be adopted well. Make testing and feedback visible to everyone. Everybody wants the product to succeed. You can share the routes of discovery with the entire team. And anyone who will listen, for that matter. So drawing programs are a really physical and obvious output of UX and design effort, but it's really not where you can add the most value. I think ultimately a good user experience and design team will probably ask too many questions. They'll bug everybody else, or they should, and focus on the actual outcome of the product that you're working on rather than the output that you physically create. So stop blissfully filling all of your shared drives with 1 million different design files that you've organized very well, categorically solved every problem in, and respect your final outcomes in code, and build things with that knowledge, design things with that knowledge, get the right tools for the right job at the right time, and save your perfection for sitting down next to engineers or with engineers and working in code. Get invested in all parts of the product and try and share all your understanding with everyone in the team. Thanks. Do you get to grill me now? Is that how that works?
Yeah, I'd like a couple of questions, if anyone's got any questions for Claire. But it is Jason up next, so yeah.
Thank you for letting me go first, Jason.
So Claire, I've got a question.
Oh no, yeah.
So it's obviously it's all well and good. Obviously, you know, we've worked together, right? So
yes.
But I still struggle with what happens when you've got somebody who maybe on the client side who is very, very wedded to the flats and the prototypes, and you know instinctively that there's a lot of waste there. Yeah. How do you deal with that?
I think that's a really tricky one, because you have to either demonstrate that there is waste, which fundamentally shows that person up, which you don't really want to do. I think ultimately you just have to try and take them on the journey and educate with examples. So demonstrate where making some flats and working on some problems in a visual way is useful. Quickly show them the results of that in engineering and in code, and explain the differences as you see them, as they come up, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, that was great.
Oh, thanks, Steve.
So not all designers can code.
No.
And not all teams have coders or front-end people to create production-ready productions. Maybe there's a production team off-site or overseas, etc. What do you do in that case?
You have to work a bit harder, I think, and I think you have to do more work to prepare for that, which I guess if there was an ideal situation, I think you would try and alleviate that by bringing the design and engineering team as close as possible. So I guess anything that would bring them closer. I would suggest starting with a simpler set of features, or maybe 1 or 2 things in design, and just encouraging those conversations. I don't know if that's much more difficult over digital, over Skype or over anything other than being in the same room. But ultimately learning by doing, so road testing the relationship and trying to keep it as cyclical as possible, however that might be, rather than siloing the 2 processes and having a set of, if you have to split them and they can't be in the same place or they can't work at the same time, try and keep that cycle as short as possible so that they can be learning.
Cool.
Does that help?
Hello.
Hi.
Are there things possibly that the prototyping software like InVision, for example, might be able to do in the future that would help with this?
Yeah, I think I've gloriously ignored a lot of the advances in in Sketch and in Vision, and stuff is catching up really, really quickly, and I think that's fantastic. And I think, terrifyingly, the problem is going to go away because the designers and UXers coming up behind us, our heels, are going to not have suffered this problem. And so I think there are some really good things. Sketch has that responsive plugin now where you can add stuff in at a certain size and visualize how it works across different viewports. And Sketch has a much better set of tools which are much more comparable to front end UI. I don't. If you want specific examples, I guess they need to just be much more representative of how the elements are represented in code. So even annoyingly, even Sketch doesn't accurately represent line height, and I think that's such a missed opportunity for them because they're so close to that being right. So I think anything that brings them closer, is that specific enough?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Claire. I just wanted to see if you think that what a role of designer and kind of what is required to be a good designer is changing in your eyes. So before it could have been just like, you're really good at delivering PSDs.
Yeah.
Do you think that's changing? And what is it changing to?
Yeah, no, I totally think so. And I think it's much more about designing whole journeys and whole experiences rather than I honestly think that somebody who makes stuff look good and a really good designer are two totally different things, because I guess you could argue it's more of a brand if you should do more of a brand kind of, or I think I'd isolate that to products and software. Maybe they are product designers and maybe traditional designers, I guess, might be quite different. But I think it's definitely evolving, and I think that those that kind of aren't doing more to think holistically about problem solving in whatever medium that is are doing a different job. I don't think we have enough labels yet. We have far too many labels, actually. So I don't have that answer. Thanks, Monica.
Cool. Anyone else? Okay, cool.
Oh, well, thanks so much for listening. I've never had a microphone.